Dr. Rod Berger, it's such a pleasure to be here. Um, my passion around storytelling began many years ago, and I think it was romanticized through the the power and the danger of war in the stories of my father growing up in war-torn Germany during World War II. So, as a basis, there's a personal connection to story, to mythology, to not knowing what is around the corner. And I've taken that approach in everything that I've done in life and been hopefully incredibly curious and honored the stories that reveal themselves as I turn that corner. But it's a pleasure to be here on Voices of the Future and to be with you, Tark.
Ron, it is an absolute privilege for me to be humbled in your presence because you are the consummate storyteller. I'm the novice. I'm the person who's trying to sort of naturally learn my way through this particular process. I am totally untrained while you're polished. And that's the difference between us. So my raw talent hopefully will come through, and you will guide me through. That
I have
really
no
is an
doubt.
absolute. It's my absolute honor to welcome you on this on the show, and it's a platform, as we were discussing. Voices of the Future is not just a podcast; it is a podcast and many other things. It's a complete ecosystem. It's a multimedia platform. You have an audio visual. You will be online. We'll be in flight services on planes. We would be and all of the stories will sort of cluster together and come together as we look into the future. And then and basically in the end, we're also putting Voices of the Future and ChatGPT, all of these transcripts, the 100 transcripts together with, let's say a 30-minute interview has about 30,000 words. We're looking at over 3 million words that goes in there, and you can start querying the book. You can actually talk to the book and sort of say, so what does the book say about storytelling? What does the book say about ethics in AI? What does the book say about love? What does the book say about mental health? And you'd get the answers from the best of the best. We're training the AI now, the ChatGPT bot right now, as we speak, as we finish all our stories. And the idea is that this is going to be an interactive book. And I'll keep pushing the boundaries on this one because we have text to voice, and then we'll have text to voice to image in the coming future. We talk to folks like Microsoft and others to start pushing the boundaries and sort of saying, this is what the future book looks like. And
So you're just acknowledging to the audience that you're a narrative mad scientist.
I'm a narrative mad scientist. That is actually very good. I actually had a not-for-profit that I set up called MAD. Mad not as an angry, but mad as a make a difference. And my social platform was 100% mad because it was literally a pass-through of money. So if you give me $100, $100 will go through, and I'll find another way to pay the expenses. And you cannot imagine the amount of resistance I got from what I would call the philanthropy industrial complex. And they were putting all sorts of roadblocks and compliance issues and so on because I was challenging the norm, which is what we do. And I dare say you've done a lot of that in your storytelling in your life. So as we go further in this conversation, Rod, let's talk about little Rod, little Rodney running around somewhere. What inspired you in your early days? What sort of got you excited? What got you into trouble?
What got me into trouble? Well, I would say that I love that as a sort of a narrative hook there at the end. What got me in trouble? Because I avoided trouble like the plague. So I was actually the upright student with the good posture because I was in fear of the environment around me. And the only way that I knew how to adapt was to follow in line what was being asked of me and others. I will tell you that probably the greatest influence on my perspective of life, not just as a friend, a spouse, a parent, a storyteller, is that I did have an older father, a much older father. And because of that, my need for connection was based on traversing a very long timeline, meaning I enjoyed connecting with adults even when I was a kid, because there was always a hope that there was a story that they would share with me, that they would take a moment, because then it felt like the light was being shared amongst us. as opposed to maybe other kids that were my age that were acting very appropriate and having fun and learning lessons in that manner. I would have
Mhm.
much more fun learning about my teachers, what they liked, their backgrounds. That was always compelling to me. So I think that sort of that storyteller slash journalist was early on in my life and gave great meaning to me.
And you sort of, did you actually feel that this is the direction you'll end up in, or did you hit journalism and stuff more by accident?
Well, I'll tell you the initial dream. So the point of connection for my father and I, and I will say this because I can, I, he did fit, my late father did fit what many would call a stereotype of German people, fair
Mhm.
or unfair, less emotive, strict, of a certain generation. But the one area that we would connect was we would watch the acclaimed news program 60 Minutes. So even as a 5-year-old, I'm watching the Iran, hostage crisis and these different elements sort of playing out on television every Sunday night, watching it just with my father. And so my initial dream was to be Mike Wallace,
Right.
his hard hitting, interviewing, his unabashed pursuit of the truth and of leveling the playing field
Mhm.
for everyone to have platform. That's at least the way that I would conceptualize it. That's really sort of set that initial flame. Now, how I got to where I am in storytelling was a very Forrest Gumpian approach, like it or love it. And so it's not traditional. I started out in my secondary sort of education in college focused on that,
Mhm.
on broadcasting and journalism, and I loved it, and it was great. But I had at the same time I had been doing public speaking and working with young people, and I was again I think seeking out connection in different ways, and that was the power of the microphone. That was the power of the story. But it was also very powerful to do it live and in person with
Yeah.
young people. And so I'll sort of pause there, but that's where I sort of there was a fork in the road, and how was I going to get there and how would I learn more about human interaction? And that's when I pursued my doctorate in clinical psychology because I wanted more of this. I wanted one-on-one to understand the human dynamic, and I thought if I can understand this between you and I right now, I'd
Yeah.
have a much better shot of asking a question
Yeah.
that mattered and
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah. You have touched a few things, a few very interesting buttons in my makeup. And when I start my keynotes, I start with trust, truth, and ethics. This trifecta is what's going to define our future. As a futurist, it's not about AI and tech. It's not about machine learning and drones. It's not about genetics and nanotechnology. Actually, it's about truth and trust because it's always been at a premium. But today, because of the trust deficit around us, it is really, really critical for our survival more than just anything else. And so, what is your view on and your definition of trust? How do you trust somebody? How do you trust media? How do you trust um, your governments and your institutions? Because, frankly, at the moment, my trust level is extremely low.
It's interesting when you say that. It makes me the first word that pops in my mind is responsibility, and I'll say personal responsibility because I think trust goes both ways, right? So we can say that sunlight is the great antiseptic. It can disinfect the world around us, but I think one of the challenges is that it also is very revealing. Sunlight is very revealing. So while I might be yelling or I may be pushing back against something politically or even against sport or my neighbors or a child that's being confrontational, that sunlight is going to expose the way in which I think of trust, the way in which I engage.
Yeah.
And I think we struggle to understand the reciprocity of communication and
Sure.
relationship. And we think in very sort of in a very singular and myopic way. And by doing that, I think we lose an opportunity to understand the way other people think, where they're coming from. I mean, to me, it's called discourse. And if you think about it, I would contend, you correct me if I'm wrong, Tarek, but some of the greatest relationships that we have are born from an initial conflict or an initial difference of opinion.
Mhm.
And that when we actually get through that, we have an appreciation for that other person. You know why? Because they joined us in that journey of discovery. And that's where trust is built. That's why we hope that happens with our children when we're parents. That is something that if it happens successfully in a marriage succeeds. And if it doesn't, that's potentially where it goes off the rails. So I agree with you completely that trust is, if we're looking at sort of the table of elements, that may be the fundamental element to our species in the way in which we engage with each other in a increasingly smaller and smaller world.
Indeed, and I look at trust. I mean, you gave me a beautiful intellectual response here. But in addition, trust is about truth and honesty, but it's also about reliability. It's also about people being able to depend on you. It's also about creating ambient trust. A doctor in a village has ambient trust because by definition, you have built that. Politicians in the good old days, when they were less tainted by the lobbyists and everybody else, were your trusted representatives who would stand for you and by you. To me, trust has 10 different dimensions, and you almost need a barometer or a trust meter, and then you need to go. And I had that once, and I created that. It is to say, okay, honesty 95%, or reliability 80%. So you could actually be honest and reliable about something, but not deliver. So we don't trust you by definition. So there's a lot. And then we are looking at trust leaps. Technology to me is taking a leap of trust, because the moment you put your money on your cell phone, you have taken a trust leap into technology. The moment you're letting your bot make a decision for you, you've taken those trust leaps. So technology and humanity actually at this moment in time is going through this dance almost, or being able to find ways to trust itself. Technology is not smart, we are. Technology is not biased, we are. Technology is not unethical, we are. So I think we need to look at our own moral compass before we, train our technologies to serve us and be subservient to us rather than the other way around.
And I don't know if you agree with this, but to your point, I think that underscores the desperation we should have in the utilization of story. This is why your voices of the future is so important at a time like it is right now. Meaning, it's interesting when I personally interviewed Hadi Partovi, the founder of code.org. And he and his brother grew up during the first Iraq War, and just the incredible stories of two young boys running to the rooftop to see where the latest bomb had hit and how that impacted his life and what he's done with code.org now, teaching millions of children around planet Earth. And he shared with me, Tark, that actually right now is the slowest point of innovation. Yet the
Interesting.
general public believes that we are moving at light speed. But right in this moment, this is our pit stop. This is our pulling off the road to use the restroom, to grab a snack, because it'll never be this slow again. And because of that, I think, to your point around trust and the different mechanisms and the different sort of paradigm shifts that it can take based on the expectation, the scenario, the situation, this is when story and discourse are so incredibly important, because you're right. Technology isn't biased. We are. Right? We're the ones writing the code, developing the technology to basically assess an environment in a certain way and to label something or identify something as good, bad, or indifferent. And so this is where learning about cultures, and that's what I love about the Voices of the Future, is you have such a diverse sample set of people from all different parts of our culture globally.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because I think the echo chamber, especially in my home country, is strong. It seems to be built out of, they seem to be built out of titanium, and we have to be able to penetrate that wall, because an echo chamber does nothing but take us backwards in our development while technology is advancing and basically lapping us.
Indeed. And interestingly enough, my publisher was insisting that I should sort of focus the entire conversation and the entire narrative into one city, maximum one country. And I declined. And at my own peril, I took on this responsibility, because he said, "Oh, it can't be successful because it's just too dispersed, not diverse, dispersed. It's too diluted. It's all over the place. You won't be able to pull it together." And 12 months later, it's actually now taking shape. It's an interesting segue now, Rod, to talk about storytelling. Your TEDx was on storytelling. Um, my experience on TEDx was also quite interesting. After you shared yours, I'll share mine.
So TEDx was incredibly interesting. In a perfect world, I would have had months, if not years, to prepare and think about what I was going to say and how I would say it. Because for those that don't know, a TEDx speech is unlike any keynote or panel you might participate in or give. It's just a very different sort of confined space with a set of rules that have obviously worked very well in helping to support the dispersion of learning. Um, I had 8 weeks. I got a phone call. I was asked to be the final TEDx at this event, to sort of close down and be the, so it wasn't just will you do it, but will you be the one that puts the cherry on top?
Mhm.
And within that 8 weeks, not only did I have to coalesce my thoughts and ideas around storytelling, which was a great exercise to do, by the way, personally and professionally, but I was also heading to Northwest Uganda to the Mvepi refugee settlement on the South Sudan border with 75,000 refugees. And so my TEDx is a very visceral experience for me because I was working on it and sending audio recordings from my phone from a hut in Northwest Africa to the organizers to get, sort of approval and just sort of some of the semantics of just, putting together a TEDx talk. So I think the TEDx experience was something that I encourage people, if you have the opportunity, it will force you to think about the power of your story, the place in history where your story fits, the impact. And I think it's a great way to think and reflect on what it is you want to do, and what you can do. What are the possibilities? So I love, if some would say, what a love-hate relationship, because it really does force you to squeeze a lot of information, life experience into
Yes.
one 18-minute bottle.
Indeed, I did TEDx twice. My second one was a bit more memorable for me, and my title was "Only the Mad Will Thrive." So
That's a
you've got to
great
be
title.
completely nuts to be able to do well. And my whole thing is that some people call me eccentric. And my professor Tony Buzan explained to me once that he said, Q, do you know the meaning of eccentric, the genuine sort of the source of the word? And I said, Tony, I'm sure you'll tell me. He said, yes, I will. Eccentric means you're off center. Okay, so here's a normal distribution curve, and you are on the edges. You're in the last 1-2%, and you're the kinds of people who bring about change and bring about difference, and everybody else is norming themselves while you are changing stuff. So the narrative that I was constructing within my TED talk was about becoming mad, going completely nuts, and testing hypotheses and pushing the boundaries. I also spoke about metamorphosis. I spoke about, and literally, I was repeating it a couple of days ago, that, for a caterpillar to become a butterfly, you have to go through a metamorphosis, which to me is literally immersing yourself in the pupa, in the chrysalis. And then the chemical reaction is that it liquidizes itself and then comes out as this beautiful, vibrant, blazing butterfly that can fly 1,000 miles. And that metamorphosis is what we need to go through, because the world that we're living in, change is too slow, transformation is better, reinvention is good, but metamorphosis is necessary long term. So you cannot be a faster caterpillar or a caterpillar with an AI engine or a caterpillar with a neural network link from Elon Musk. You actually need to to transform yourself and go through that metamorphosis. So my question to you, I mean, I will talk about storytelling in a moment, but my key question to you is, do you think that the world is at a point where we really, because of technology, because of societal changes, cultural shifts, and so on, that we actually need to go through a metamorphosis rather than just little nudges here and there?
I don't think we even have a choice in that. I think it's going to be forced upon us, and to a great extent, I think that's okay. That's good. I think that we have to, I think, readjust our thinking. Take education for example. What are we going to do in a world where I've been interviewing a lot of AI experts who off camera say to me that they are concerned because moms and dads and teachers and administrators at K through the K-12 and higher ed, secondary education are saying, well, AI is, it's here, but it's just a fad. Talk to any AI. There's no fad about it. That's not even a part of the sort of the the menu of AI. It is instigating a metamorphosis of our culture
Mhm.
and our way of being. I love your use of the term metamorphosis and sort of the necessity of it. Um, and so, if we look at education, how are we going to not think differently about our systems, our institutions, if conceptually the answers are already provided? Right? If the AI search bar replaces a Google search, that will change the way in which we educate ourselves, the way in which we educate others, the way in which we think about the information across our ecosystem. And so, yes, I do agree with you. And I think education is a great example of how we need to be thinking about our systems because we will have to adapt. Young people will say there are no jobs, there are no career paths for someone to figure out the answer anymore. And by the
Yeah.
way, that's been the general pursuit of education since our inception, which is to
Mhm.
say, there's a problem. Let's be explorers, whether we're explorers behind a computer, on a boat, right? That's been the purpose of our species is to seek answers.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Seek answers and solve problems because we find ways to solve problems. Just going back to TEDx for a second, in terms of the construct and the structure of storytelling, they were training me and guiding me through what a TEDx talk should sound like, and wanted me to look at Martin Luther King and others. And there's a structure. You go flat, you bring it down, and you literally build yourself to this crescendo. And interestingly enough, they said that you need just one theme that you take all the way through, which was a very difficult discipline for me because I'm all over the place when I had to bring myself back. From your perspective, what is the construct of a good story, particularly as we talk to people in business and in life?
Great question. And this ended up being the title of my TEDx, but the story is our currency.
Mhm.
And if you really sort of sit in that, you think about how that applies, regardless of the year that it is, the time of year, the day, the hour, is that it's the story. And it's funny because we see this across the spectrum of the human experience, Tarek, right? A young person has an issue at school. And when they come home, what do they need to do? They need to think through story to explain it to mom or dad. They get in trouble. They need to go to the headmaster or the principal. They've got to think about the story, right? That's bartering to get through some experience, right? It's a couple that wants to share news of pregnancy with family. What's the story we're going to tell? What's the story when we announce a new relationship? What's the story we want to tell about a merger of our businesses? What's the story you and I are going to tell, Tarek, if we join hands in storytelling? What does that press release look like? And so for me, that was incredibly powerful because as I had spent time, and the year before I had been in Senegal, and I was in some very remote regions. And I kept thinking to myself, the challenges that I'm witnessing here as a Tubob is what they call a white man in Western Africa. Um, they seem very similar to those that I might hear from someone in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States, or in Stockholm, or in Rome. And you think to yourself, okay, sure, the environments are different, the circumstances may be variably, different, but at the essence, we're all humans. And so I may not have money in my pocket, but I've got a story, and I've got a story that can either inform you, provide connection, help us through something. And so for me, that was the needle that I was threading, which was story is our currency. Whether you're a refugee in Northwest Uganda, talking about stories that have lasted hundreds of years across the African continent to help understand colonization and survival and what it means to have dignity, that applies to those in Manhattan and Rome and London.
Mm. Indeed. The other thing which I often use and people have told me about this is that I have a language of metaphors. I have a language of images, and I create images in people's minds. And I,
That
you know,
just means you're a good communicator, by the way.
okay, thank you. But I think, and I do that even in business. So when and I wanted to ask your experience in terms of when you're standing in front of a board or an executive committee or an editorial team, and you're sharing a story. How do you shift the what I would call their immune system response, their block to any new idea coming in because they're not used to it? It's uncomfortable. And if you're looking at Senegal and Entebbe and South Uganda and Southern Sudan, that to an average person is, pretty hoo-hoo stuff is out there. They don't get it. So therefore, you are now bringing in a foreign, virus into our little echo chamber and talking about something that we really don't know, care, or can relate to. What's the kind of language, the approach to use to break through that immune system and that barrier?
So I love that question because I think that the entire sort of business community has been inverted, and or we have to. It's sort of like taking 2 points in the universe and folding them together. I think we have to think differently about the people that we're working with, the talent that we're trying to attract, and how that impacts the culture and the business strategy and objectives we have going forward. The conditions have changed, right? We had we were dealing with COVID, right? So we had hybrid workforces, or remote, I should say. Then we had hybrid, and now we're having this crisis of commercial real estate where people aren't going face to face.
Yeah.
And so if you're sitting there and you're running a major corporation, you're wondering, how do we handle our talent? Right? Because we either are going to communicate that we understand their needs, and we do so by associating with their lives, the way in which they want to live their lives, and the needs that they have based on their employers and the talent that they are bringing to the table. And that's where I think having a better understanding. Look, the Gen Z is looking at purpose over profits, and that's really hard. That is injecting a virus into a petri dish and not understanding how do we do this, because you're actually more concerned about, when you think about your benefits package as an employee, you've redefined what a benefit is.
Mhm.
And I contend that more employees want to know the story behind the company, the spirit of the company. They want to see the story of the leadership and those that they partner with over how something is built or how it's been structured or how many sprints it took to develop a certain technology. That's what they want to connect to. And that's where meaning happens. And so ultimately, I think companies of all shapes and sizes are going to thrive if they alter their mission statement to reflect that of a modern day media company. Because a modern day media company has to think about, what stories are we telling? How are we distributing those stories? Are we getting the feedback from our consumers, basically? And how does that then change our path forward? I mean, there's a reason why Harvard Business Review, most of their front covers are about storytelling, that businesses will die in the vine if they don't understand the power of narrative and
Yeah.
applying that.
I I would challenge you on that, if I may, because for me, media at this point in time, it is absolute lowest ebb ever. And I've been in the media business for the last 30 odd years. And I've worked for Dow Jones, I've worked for the Times and Sunday Times,
Bloomberg, yep.
and Bloomberg and the whole lot. So I've seen it all from both sides. And I think they are at an absolute, it's in shambles. I don't get the truth from them. And I have frankly lost trust almost completely in what I would call traditional media. You mentioned citizen media, which is actually quite interesting, and how we can perhaps rate journalists on the quality of truth that they tell us, the quality of stories that they bring us. Because to me, groupthink in media at the moment, it's absolutely awful. Give you an example. I was talking to one of the deputy editors of the Economist, which is a very good publication in comparison to many. And he said, we've had some blind spots. We've had some groupthink. Gave examples of groupthink. He said, none of us anywhere in the world believed that Donald Trump could actually win. And that was our group think, and our narrative was only to reinforce that group think. And that is exactly how the whole thing. It says, none of us saw Brexit. That was another group think. And where he was going with that is that we actually find ourselves in these echo chambers, and that's how we disseminate our stories. Now let's get into more technology-driven media that we have. They are addiction engines and manipulation engines. They're not news, but we are consuming them as news. We're consuming them as stories, and all sorts of nonsense is coming through in that, because they just want me to stay there as long as possible. And as long as they keep feeding, because they understand my behavior set, keep feeding me what I want to hear and what reinforces my belief system, I'll stay online. Therefore, where's truth? Where's discomfort? Where's conflict? Where's disagreement? Where is critical thinking? Where is the objective truth rather than because the objective truth, we as journalists, we as communicators need to reach that absolute truth, and one source of truth almost. I don't see that. I don't know, maybe you have a better view of the world, because I am at this moment in time extremely skeptical.
I think we're probably saying the same thing, but we're at different altitudes. Meaning,
Okay.
I agree with you at the altitude that you're at. You're at basically ground level, and I share every view that you shared. I think is incredibly poignant. What I'm talking about is the notion that we both would agree that healthy eating is important, right? And maybe we're talking about the food industry. And so I'm saying we need to think more like the food industry. Well, I'm not saying that we need to think about, sort of all the food that is leading to, a diabetic, diagnosis and these sorts of things. What I'm talking about is think like a media company in the way in which we have to communicate broadly. If you think about a general and typical business structure, marketing and communications are sort of at the end of the line, right? They're the first ones to go. They're the last ones in the door. And it's the last thing we think about typically when we are launching a product. But what happens when we are struggling? We look at our customer stories, our case studies. We have to find ways to communicate that out to generate interest and buzz. And so where I'm agreeing with you in a very granular sense, we're struggling with, because media can be incredibly powerful, right? To your point, we're being
It is
fed,
indeed extremely powerful. Yeah.
right? It's almost hypnotic in
Indeed.
the
It's
most
hacking our
dangerous
brains.
form. It's
Yeah.
hacking our brains. What I'm saying is now we have to communicate stories. We have to communicate in ways that we can pivot at a moment's notice. We understand the data points based on the people that are interacting with our products and services. That sort of approach has to be something that's not just an initiative. It's the way in which we work, that we find as much value in what we're communicating outwardly as we do in the development of our products and services. And that's what I'm talking about. So I might be 10,000 feet above what you're talking about. But I would love to hear your perspective on what I'm saying here, just in the way in which we think about how to separate ourselves from the white noise.
Certainly. One of the things I look at when I look at media is the incentive structure. Every major media corporation is a major media corporation. It's there to make money. And therefore, this tension between independence of thought and information versus the whole idea of making money. Look at most media today. It's owned by oligarchs. It's owned by billionaires. Hallelujah. If this was happening in Russia, it would be really bad. But the fact is, it's happening in the US is absolutely fine. There's Murdoch, there's Bloomberg, there's Bezos. They're all billionaires.
Why are they doing that?
Because they're making money, and they can influence people. It's power.
Because they understand the power. It's like a weapon
100%.
that they say, this is a new age weapon, right? So again,
Yes.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Sure. So it is a new age weapon, and yes, we can use it for business and so on. But where I'm going again with this is that our billionaires are owning the narrative. They know the power, and then they can basically tilt the power in whichever direction they want. Then we have a second incentive system, which is what I would call the donor class when it comes to U.S. politics, and I have not in mainstream media heard most mainstream people like a CNN or something ever talk about the fact that somebody gave somebody $1 million as a donation, as a political donation, and they are completely objective and unbiased. So, and then in the midterm election, I think it was $1.8 billion that was spent in donations and on media, because all of the money, 80% of the money that comes to the politicians goes through the media channels. So guess what? As far as the media is concerned, keep the gravy train moving, because we keep making more and more money. What I'm saying here is that I think we really, and that's where the metamorphosis comes in, we really need to shift the narrative from, yes, media is powerful, so we need to jump on that, to say, can we make media truthful, objective, non-financially driven, incentivized, and celebrated on the quality? You spoke about Mike Wallace, you spoke, I mean, Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite used to sit there and say something, and we believed it, because he may be 80%, 90% right, but he came from a place of authenticity, because that's what journalism in our parents' time was, is an authentic form of stories. So where I know this is a very deep and tough conversation, but it's an important one. And I think a lot of people shy away from it, is the fact that modern media, as we know it, is extremely potent and powerful. However, with great power comes great responsibility.
And we are
That's
failing
where
at
we're
that.
lacking.
Well, I
And
would
we've,
ask you, as if we've taken a deep dive here, is how would you conceptualize it then? Because again, I have nothing. It's an important conversation to have. I think that we are challenged because, to your point, and you didn't use this vernacular, but I will, which is most, if not all, content is sponsored content in some form or fashion. We just don't know exactly where or when the money
yeah,
or the
yeah,
contribution has been made.
yeah,
And in fact, one of the, especially in the West, I think one of the great examples, which is a little frightening, if not incredibly frightening, is you have agencies out there that are bold, Tark. They're so bold that they're guaranteeing placements for clients in iconic brands because they
yes,
know that they can. It's like old world mafia. They know they have a direct door in to pay
100%.
to
Yeah,
get something placed. And
yeah,
people want to do that because they think it still has relevance in
yeah,
their sector, in their industry. I get those phone calls all the time from CEOs who say, I should be in Inc. magazine. Can you help me with that? Yeah. And you say, okay, everything's upside down, right?
yes,
Everything is upside down. And we still have to
yeah,
document that as storytellers.
yeah,
But some might argue that this is sort of the steady, if not rapid decline of our love of reading and literacy,
yeah,
right? Because we can be much more efficient with our time by just getting in front of a microphone, doing
yeah,
a quick dance on TikTok, and that
yeah,
gets blasted out. And we don't have to actually think to ourselves, what are we saying? How are we saying it? Will we offend groups of people, unwittingly, or
yeah.
bring more people in?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, as we move away towards the future now, it is quite interesting. Everybody was saying that long form is out, audio is out, go 2 minutes, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, the whole thing. And I'm old school, and I want to have these meaningful, in-depth conversations. And then within that, we could find those 2 minute nuggets. But we have to have this interaction before we actually get there to and this is where we are sort of peeling the onion and getting to the core much more. And I think that kind of discourse is lacking. So one last comment on what I would call mainstream media. You have 5, 6, 7 minutes. You have two questions. You have to answer them in a certain way, and you get blocked. It does not lend itself to a real conversation with a to and fro in a in a manner that is intellectually honest, and we move forward from there.
Yeah,
Anyway, moving forward from here.
by the way, I would say, put in a capper on that. To me, it's akin to saying, you know what, we're gonna celebrate just cheap wine. We're gonna get rid of the decanter because why would we
Yes,
want to let anything breathe? Because
yes,
in that pregnant pause is where
yeah,
relationships are built, and
Yeah.
forged and
Yeah.
then toasted with a shared glass of wine. But that's not what we're
Indeed.
doing.
Indeed. And that's a beautiful, beautiful metaphor that you've just brought in. Looking forward into the future, this is the voices of the future, and you have amazing sort of wisdom, context, experience from all over the world in difficult circumstances. When you look into the future today, are you optimistic for your kids and family and friends? Do you feel that with all of the elements of technology, society, humanity, all of these components, are you optimistic?
Well, if you'd like a complex answer, I can absolutely serve that dish
I'm
hot from the
asking,
kitchen. No, I know
yeah,
you. I
yeah.
Here's what when I think about the world sort of writ large, here's where I am optimistic. I am optimistic in pockets of planet Earth. I'll give you an example. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Nordics, and it has become maybe it is sort of romanticized from my experience, but a wonderful culture that celebrates collaboration, family, relationships, history, and the future. And why I say that is whenever I'm there, we're talking about sustainability in every form and fashion and ways in which to support the, you know, the survivability of our planet and the enjoyment of our planet in ways that I never hear when I'm, just at the soccer fields here in the United States. And so, on one side of the coin, that's disappointing that we're not talking about our future and protecting our future and our planet for the next generation and those to follow. But when I'm in the Nordics, I'm revitalized because I am learning about people of all ages and backgrounds that are committing themselves to either participating in the discourse at sort of the most basic level or doing something about it because they have the talents, the skills, the resources, and the background to do that. And that to me is a healthy culture. That's a healthy ecosystem where even if someone doesn't feel that that's their area of expertise, they want to participate in the discourse. This goes back to your discussion around trust. And so that for me is an example of a healthy ecosystem where we are doing some really great things and we're supporting young, old, and different, and also cultures that are now joining in the Nordics and calling it home.
Yeah, it's a very interesting place that you have taken us. And as one of the members, one of the voices in the book is a guy called Eric Almquist, and he's from Sweden. And the question that I asked him was, Eric, how come places like Finland and Sweden and Denmark is outpunching well beyond their weight class when it comes to innovation, well beyond their environment, and they're looking into the future? And we had a very interesting conversation around hypercapitalism. On the one hand, you have hypercapitalism versus very low taxes versus capitalism, high taxes, social balance, and very high innovation and very great sort of opportunity of creating wealth. And they are two completely different sort of sides of the same coin. And he said, very interestingly, he said, we don't actually worry about the fact that our health, education, etc., is all covered. So we focus on things that really are generally meaningful. And it's so interesting. And I hadn't seen it, heard it framed in that way. As a nation, we can spend time on innovation, and if we hit a bump on the road, we know we're okay, even though I'm paying 60% taxes. And he said, after a while, you just get desensitized to it and you're fine because you know you're looked after, you know your kids are looked after, and so on. So it's a very interesting dichotomy of thought that small countries are becoming extremely creative in nature because they are looked after. So where I was going with that is I think there are no absolutes, and we don't need to hear the US story or the China story or the Singaporean story only, but we need to take the best of all of them, because I dare say there are some good bits in all of them. And we need to find that new framework, that new mix, which actually serves humanity and serves us. A couple of final questions, because this conversation is is interesting. One of the thoughts I have, and I dare say, as a clinical psychologist, you'll have a lot to think about and say about it, and that is that in this technological digital world that we're in, and which is changing exponentially, anything that can be digitized will be, because it'll be a million times faster and a million times cheaper. But anything and everything that cannot be digitized, love, harmony, heart, soul, spirit, compassion, imagination, critical thinking, judgment, ethics, trust, truth, all of these things cannot be digitized for the foreseeable future. And they are a million times more valuable. What are we doing as storytellers? What are you doing as storyteller to basically say, technology is there to serve us, it'll be fine, we'll keep working on that. But actually, it's all about humanity. It's all about us and how can we create that beautiful future or beautiful futures based upon the more human elements as opposed to the technological elements. Big question, sorry.
Yeah, big question, and I'm trying to find. Can you go a little further if you don't mind?
Sure. So what I'm saying here is that we are getting dependent on technology, and we feel that technology is leading everything, AI is leading everything, and that is going to define our lives, the future. What I'm saying is technology is an enabler, but it's actually humanity, us and our ethics and our morality and our conscience and our spirit and our compassion and our love is what's going to define the future, not technology. Technology is going to enable us to get there faster. But whatever future we create for ourselves needs to be more human as opposed to be more technical.
And I agree. And what I'm thinking about as you say that, Tarek, is I'm wondering about the doors, right? So I think we talk about sort of what is directly in front of us, and to your point about the story of the Nordics and where focus can be, where we can put our focus, right, in our lives, and how that then maybe impacts sort of the development and the support of a healthy lifestyle. And I'm wondering about how technology and the relationship we have. And I love this sort of thought about the things that we can digitize and that we can't. So it's very visual for me as you say that. And it makes me wonder about, when it's a concept of when one door opens, one door closes, one door opens. But if we sort of expand that out and we say, you know, what if we're in an environment and there is this talk to pictures where as I speak, visual images in real time are on the screen sort of developing, right? And I am sort of breathing into existence this digital painting and these sorts of things. Will that make me think about love differently? Will that make me think about the way in which I look at planet Earth? I was speaking with Deepak Chopra, and he talked about how what's fascinating is the younger generation are going to start to get very annoyed with physical objects like trees. You know why? Because they live in a world that's digitized where they can manipulate and move things.
Mm.
And that to me was, I mean, Deepak Chopra is incredibly thoughtful. And I think whether you agree wholeheartedly, he makes you think. And I
Absolutely.
like to think. It feels like I'm going to a gym and exercising. And so it makes me then wonder, what are the other doors that are going to open that were previously we thought were locked? Whether that was that as my personality, like what if my father was living now? Would he be maybe more open to having an engaging relationship with neighbors or do something different professionally because he had
Mm.
no idea that technology would it's like discovering a new flavor of ice cream,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is it's the excitement, but it's also I think it's the cautionary tale of being prepared and thoughtful about the way in which we experience the world that is directly in front of us and now behind us, above us, below us in this sort of three-dimensional experience.
I'll give you a context which I also heard as part of this whole series, and that is about Japanese children when they go to school to the age of about 8 or 9. There's very little formal education, but there's a lot of learning. One of the learnings that they have is they have a patch of soil, and almost in every school, and they know and they need to learn how to sow, how to put seeds in there and grow rice, because they need to learn about soil, water, patience, understanding the joy of something coming out, being able to, and that is the way they relate to nature. Is from the age of 5, 6, 7, they're playing in sand and they're growing rice. Now, I know it sounds really very Pollyannish and very idealistic, but they're learning. And in Finland is the same thing. They barely have about an hour of formal education and 5 hours of play. Age is not relevant, and everybody plays together, and so on. And I think our schooling system needs to have a little relook and a rehash in
Could
terms of
not
not
agree
just
more.
yeah, and I think that's sort of where I think a lot of our issues are. Rod, the way the series is developing, and since you are an expert in this sort of space, I'll share the two strands that I have in my head and get your expert advice and views on. When I started creating this series, Voices of the Future, I had two things in mind. One of them was TEDx, the fact that you're storytelling in that environment. But TEDx has an amazing model. And their model is that you and I, when we presented on TEDx, we took the message to our audiences. And their 10,000 videos a year, which are for free, it costs them zero. Marketing costs them zero. This is how they create that platform and created this whole environment. That was one driver for me, is how can we reach literally millions and perhaps billions of people in the future. And I want to do it for good. I want to find a way to monetize that, to create an environment where we can actually help people and support people and serve people. So that was one element. The other element, which would be close to your heart, is Arabian Nights, the Thousand Stories from Sherazad. Is basically for us to stay alive, for us to keep growing and keep thinking. We need to keep telling wonderful new stories. And these are the two sort of catalysts in my head while building Voices of the Future. I'd love your view, your knowledgeable view. Mine is, as I said, a very raw approach, but yours perhaps is more polished and cultured.
Well, that quite a setup there. I don't know if it's polished or cultured. What I would say is what I appreciate, because I do share this with you, and it's a thought that I've had, is when you're watching TED Talks, TEDx Talks, is what's next. And here's what I mean by that. We are used to now, especially in the West, and this is both a first world problem and opportunity at the same time, is that we can get incredibly close to those people that we idealize, that we want to aspire to be, and through media, through social media, right? So all these channels where we can see people in a day in the life. And I think that that potentially is the next frontier for storytelling, because this is not a knock at all. I just think this is a natural next step for storytelling, right? What was incredible about TEDx is the TED concept, and I've interviewed Chris Anderson and Sir Ken Robinson a few times. Very lucky to interview Sir Ken, who really is if anyone is the father of TED Talks, it's Sir Ken Robinson.
And a
Is
father, not just of storytelling, but a father of what I would call the move towards modern learning for young people, for kids, because that was his perspective.
absolutely is that you want more. And so what does more look like? We want more just in general. I think that's just part of our DNA as a
Yes.
species. And so if we want more, we also see the necessity to tell stories as a process of exchanging learning, to solve problems, to cure, diseases, these sorts of things. There's a great utility in story. And so how do we apply more to storytelling? And I think you're in that jet stream now. Um, and I would encourage you to keep pushing. And I hope people like myself can join you on that journey. But that extension being, if I'm watching a TED Talk and it moves me and it inspires me to either read somebody's book or start digging around based on a concept I had not heard prior to the previous, 18 minutes that I just went through watching a TED Talk. I want more from that individual. So the fact that you're interviewing these voices of the future, you're giving ways and creative ways to be able to put that story out. And really, look, there's no magic in this concept, which is, there's that notion of learning styles. And if you apply that to storytelling, you think to yourself, well, what do we have at our disposal? We have audio, we have video, we have written, we have physical, we have digital, right? And now we have full on digital environments, the metaverse. So these environments, the real estate is growing, it's expanding, and finding different ways to experience somebody's voice and not about the same topic over and over again. I think that's actually when you talk about the mechanics of it. I don't want to just know about um, Richard Gerver, who's a dear friend of mine, and it was Sir Ken was his mentor, and he's a very well-known and accomplished speaker and author in education and change. I want to experience Richard Gerver in different environments. I want to hear him on different topics. I do not want the sort of old school typical model of Richard gives a speech about how to change schools, and he does that like a stand-up comedian does until that act goes incredibly sort of stale, right?
Mm.
And then they have to come up with something new. I think the storytelling is, let's challenge ourselves not to the one-off, because the one-off is easy, but we have the technology now.
Mm.
And yes, we might be an expert in storytelling, but what about putting characters together? What about stories that pit? And this is a part of my efforts that I've got going on. Is I love the moderating element of extracting story. And so why would we not want to hear stories that put people around a dinner table in the middle of a forest in Sweden from very different backgrounds and expertise, where I get to hear a famous chef talk about diversity. I get to hear a technologist talk about sustainability and or good food. Like, I think that learning is about this sort of three-dimensional experience of that individual. And I think we should be thinking in that sense like a metaverse, because there's probably so much more I could learn
Yes.
from. And now sadly Sir Ken, we lost him a couple of years ago, but wouldn't you love to sit down and have a glass of wine? And I'm a lucky one that has done that with Sir Ken and talk about things other than school.
Sure. And interestingly enough, part of that storytelling will come as holograms and as digital twins, and we
Yes.
bring Sir Ken back, and we can bring Nelson Mandela back, and we bring your dad back, and actually have that engagement and that
Give me
conversation.
advanced warning though, okay?
Yes. Yes, indeed. It's actually not that far away. A lot of these things happening. I mean, just when I spoke to Michio Kaku, I mean, the way he was speaking about it was that it's almost imminent. Well, normal people like you and I, it's probably a little bit further away, but he thinks he vibrates at a different level. So,
Yes, he does.
as a concluding comment, thought, scenario, let's put ourselves into a time machine and propel ourselves to your 100th birthday. And you're still at halftime, Rod. So long way to go. You can do what the hell you like. What do we see? What does Rod see around himself? What does the world look like? And what role has Rod played within that world?
What role have I played? What am I? Well, I think, of course, I think the natural inclination is to think in some technological space or environment that is like a Minority Report movie with Tom Cruise or something, where we can manipulate elements around us with at the drop of a hat. And that what power does that bring? So if anything, I don't know if I have a clear picture, but I think about the next step or evolution of questions that I'll be asking, because I will have the ability to ask more complex questions and queries. That to me is incredibly exciting and inviting. I'm sure that there will be, look, there's a reality that if we're continuing to strip our planet of its resources, there may be impact, right? And so what we might deem now as warm or cold, or how that impacts our vacations or where we want to live, all of those elements will most likely change and alter from what we now feel comfortable in or desire. So I sort of put that as an assumption. And then I think about what would I do if I had access in a three-dimensional space, and it would probably be to explore, to be an explorer. It's like Daniel Pink, one of my favorite authors.
Yes,
His Whole New Mind, I think it was 2008 maybe. It's just, to me, it's a simple book, but I give that is meant as a compliment, because really the notion of a whole new mind is that as we advance, we actually become more simple over time in our design and the way in which we think. It is as if those 2 points in the universe are folded, and we have a much clearer, straightforward path in the way in which we experience the environment around us. So I don't know what that will look like, but I do get excited about the possibilities to query in a way that is far beyond what I'm able to do now.
indeed. Just as an aside, before I thank you for your generosity of your time, I interviewed Walter Parks, who was the executive producer of Minority Report, and he won the Oscar for Minority Report. And he asked me what was the story, and I was sort of struggling to explain what the story was of Minority Report. But I remembered the tech, and you referred to the tech. And he said, I did not deserve the Oscar for that because people remember the tech, but they forgot the story. And it was a very interesting moment for me, an insight for me, that people like Walter Parks, they are genuine storytellers. And they were, his simple thing was, I didn't get my story across. I got my tech across. My tech dominated my story. Therefore, people lost the story. And then he asked me about Gladiator. He's also the executive producer, and he also got the Oscar for that. So he said, "What's yeah?" And he said, "What is the story about that you see in Gladiator?" So I was looking at honor and bravery and strength and power and rebellion and all those wonderful things that are more front and center. And he said, "You missed the point again." I said, "Oh my God, I'm really struggling here." And he said, "Actually, it was a love story. All he ever wanted to do was to get back to his wife and child. And his entire journey was to find a way to honorably get out of this world to go back to them. And it was about love. And everything else was subplots, and everything else was a sub-story to the main story, which was about his love. He wanted to go home to his wife and son. And that was the story. And it's a beautiful way to end our session, is to actually get to the essence of what storytelling is about, that simplicity, and again, in both these cases, whether it was Minority Report or Gladiator, it was actually a very human thing he spoke about. One was about justice and fairness, and the other one was about love. And those are the two most beautiful things I can talk about, is love and justice. Rod, absolute honor to have you here. But yeah, sorry, you were going to make a
No, I was
comment.
just going to say I love the parallels there, and I would just sort of conclude on my side that what story means to me, Tarek.
Mm.
It's when I've spent time with somebody and I have, let's say, written an article or a story about them, and they of their own doing call me and say, "No one has ever understood me and my story before."
Yes.
And
Mm.
that's, I don't mean that from a like job well done. What I mean is that process, that query, that dedicated time that you are extending to another human being resulted in a shared experience, and then let's say product or written product or content or story that feels as if that's me, and that's powerful, and it doesn't require that you've accomplished anything, whether you're a certain age. That's just human. That's being human, and so that to me is that's what it's all about.
Yes, indeed. Ron, thank you very much again. You've been amazing. You've been your insights, your wisdom, your thought-provoking comments, and I can see there's a lot more under the hood there. So I think we need we need to reconnect again to explore more and dive deeper into what I would call, which are intellectually honest conversations, real conversations and stuff. Because I think in this turbulent world that we live in, we have forgotten that type of discourse, to be able to open our hearts and open our minds to things that are, to find a better world and a better future. And that's what, again, Voices of the Future is about. So thank you again.